Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a foundational legal and ethical framework that touches, well, literally everything in the life of a Muslim.
Right. From what you eat to how you run a global business.
Exactly. We're talking about the comprehensive concepts of halal and haram in Islamic teachings.
And this is, I think, an incredibly important deep dive because the popular understanding of halal tends to, stop it.
It's
Stop.
just food, yeah.
Just food. But our sources, especially the foundational analysis from Yusuf Jamal on legal principles and fiqh, they show us this is actually a totalizing ethical code.
A total code.
It defines the boundaries of permissible conduct across personal, financial, social realms, everything.
So our mission today is to cut through that surface level understanding. We're going to give you a highly structured but hopefully very clear exploration of these concepts.
Right.
Not just defining them, but really explaining the theological sources, the legal mechanisms, and like you said, the far-reaching applications. We'll be using the core Quranic texts and the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, as our map.
Yeah, and what we really want you to walk away with is a nuanced understanding of not just what is permitted or forbidden, but why.
The why is key.
The why is everything. We want to connect those dots, especially on the underlying philosophical link between something being prohibited and the concept of harm. This deep dive is designed to transition you quickly from, just knowing the definitions to actually grasping the principles that govern lawfulness and prohibition across every dimension of life.
Okay. Let's start right at the very beginning then. Because the language itself, the actual words, they hold some profound insight into the whole system.
They absolutely do. We have to begin with the core definitions and, more importantly, their linguistic roots. They basically define the entire field of action and ethical choices for a Muslim.
So halal, it's the word we hear most often. In its simplest, most direct Arabic meaning, what does it signify?
At its foundation, halal is the Arabic word that translates most accurately to permissible or lawful or allowed. It encompasses any action, any object, any behavior that is acceptable and free from restriction under the framework of Islamic law. You can think of it as the open sanctioned space for activity.
The green light, basically.
The green light, exactly.
And if that's the open space, then haram must be the wall, the fence that defines the boundary.
Precisely. Haram is the exact opposite. It signifies forbidden, unlawful, or prohibited.
A clear binary.
And a very clear binary opposition between the two terms sets up the entire legal system. At this foundational level, there's very little gray area regarding the definitions themselves.
But the linguistic roots, I understand they give us a deeper flavor. It's more than just a legal status, isn't it? If we look at the root structures of the words, what do they tell us?
Oh, absolutely. So we look at the trilateral root for halal, which is L. This root inherently denotes lawfulness, yes, but it also carries these implications of being untied or released or loosened.
Untied.
Yeah. It suggests an opening, a solution, or something being set free for legitimate use. It's a very positive, unbinding concept.
That sounds like a sense of relief or release.
Yeah.
Almost like what is halal is fundamentally easy and natural to access.
That's a great way to put it. Now compare that to the root for haram, which is the rim.
Okay.
This root conveys the complete opposite weight: prohibition, restriction, sanctity. It implies something is being set apart and forbidden from general unauthorized use. Its concept of boundaries and inviolability.
And our sources even hint at deeper, more potent literal senses of this restrictive root. What are some of those heavier implications carried by haram?
The literal sense of the root haram can carry some really weighty theological implications that go way beyond just rule breaking.
Very quiet.
The source material notes that it may refer to dissolution, for instance, the breaking of a solemn oath or a covenant, which is essentially dissolving a sacred bond.
Wow.
And even more profoundly, it can even refer to the alighting of God's wrath or judgment.
That immediately changes the conversation, doesn't it? It means a haram action isn't just a minor infraction, it has serious theological ramifications. We're talking about broken covenants or divine displeasure. It grounds prohibition in profound consequence.
It does. It connects the legal prohibition directly to the consequence of that action on a person's spiritual state. And this leads right to the immediate consequence.
Which is?
That haram actions are not arbitrary rules. The source is very clear on this. Actions that are haram result in harm one way or another, whether that's spiritual, physical, financial, or social.
Ah, so it's always tied to harm.
Always. And therefore, they're considered a sin if carried out by a Muslim. The entire framework of prohibition is fundamentally tied to the concept of protection from damage.
So the law is protective, not just prescriptive, and that protection has to come from an ultimate authority. Where does the authority to designate something as halal or haram actually come from?
The authority is divinely sourced, which is what makes the law immutable. The primary sources for these guidelines are, first, the Quran, which is understood as the direct word and revelation of God,
The foundational text.
the foundational text, and second, the Sunnah, which comprises the teachings, practices, and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, demonstrating the practical application of the Quran.
So these two are the foundational pillars, the original source code, if you will. But we live in a world that is constantly generating new phenomena, new technologies, new economic models, new social structures. The divine law is eternal, but the world changes. How is that gap bridged?
And that's the critical role of Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh.
Right.
Since the divine text is finite, scholars are tasked with interpreting the core guidelines from time to time to ensure ongoing compliance with Islamic principles in new contexts. This whole process of legal reasoning is what transforms immutable law into a living, applicable system.
How does that process actually work? When a new ethical dilemma comes up, let's say the ethics of gene editing or decentralized finance, how do scholars of fiqh actually apply the Quran and Sunnah to declare it halal or haram?
They rely on specific methodologies. If a new issue isn't explicitly mentioned, they often use tools like qiyas, which is analogy.
Analogy.
Yeah, drawing a parallel between the new issue and explicitly addressed issue in the text. For instance, if a new drug causes the same severe societal and personal harm as alcohol, even though it's not wine, it might be classified as haram through analogy.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also look for ijma, which is consensus among reliable scholars, and they try to seek out the underlying objective of the Sharia, known as maqasid al-Sharia.
The idea of maqasid, the objectives of the law, that must be crucial here, because if the goal of the law is protection from harm, then any new phenomenon that causes that established type of harm must be prohibited, even if the Quran doesn't use the word cryptocurrency.
Exactly. And this reinforces a central insight. The determination of lawfulness is divinely sourced, and the language within the Quran itself reflects this absolute authority.
Can you show us how that manifests linguistically?
Sure. Lawfulness is usually indicated in the Quran by the verb ahalla, which means to make lawful. The key point here is that the stated or implied subject of this verb is always God.
Always.
Always. God makes it lawful. This principle that only the divine has the ultimate authority to set the boundaries of permissible conduct is paramount. It's a constant reminder that human efforts are interpretive. They don't create the law. They just apply the existing divine framework.
And that context of divine authority brings us to the second major point, which addresses the vast scope of these principles. We absolutely have to move past the idea that halal is just about what you eat.
Yes, it is the ethical blueprint for existence. Halal is applied to every facet of a Muslim's interaction with the world. It's not just food, though that is the most visible application. It applies fundamentally to finance, to business ethics, to the manner of dress and public presentation, and to all forms of social and personal behavior.
This is where the concept gets truly challenging and comprehensive. It suggests that there is no ethical vacuum. Every decision you make falls into either the permissible or the prohibited. This isn't just a diet, it's an entire economic and social infrastructure.
And to fully grasp the scope of haram, we have to understand the theological engine driving the prohibition. And that's the connection between haram and harm itself. We noted that haram actions result in damage. This prohibition is explicitly contrasted in the Quran with the concept of benefit.
Okay, so this sounds like a core philosophical principle, that God only prohibits things because the resulting harm outweighs any perceived short-term gain.
And we have a perfect, seminal example provided in our source material that illustrates this exact calculus, the verse regarding wine and gambling.
Okay, tell us about Quran 2.219 and how it establishes this ethical metric.
Quran 2.219 is definitive on this principle of balanced harm. It says, they ask you about wine and gambling, say, in them is great harm, and yet some benefit for people. But their harm is greater than their benefit.
That is essentially the theological cost-benefit analysis right there in the foundational text. But how is that greater harm measured in jurisprudence? I mean, it seems subjective.
That's where fiqh utilizes the maqasid al-Sharia, those higher objectives of the law to quantify the harm.
Right, the 5 essentials.
Exactly. Scholars agree that the law aims to protect 5 essential things: religion, life, intellect, progeny, or the family unit, and wealth. Any action that damages one or more of these pillars, even if it offers a small immediate benefit, like the temporary euphoria of wine or the quick money of gambling, is deemed to cause greater harm.
Why?
Because the damage is systemic, it's long-term, and it violates the fundamental protections of life.
So the prohibition isn't based on some arbitrary list. It is rooted in preventing genuine, quantifiable damage, spiritual and social. If something damages the intellect or destroys the family unit, it's haram by definition, regardless of the momentary pleasure it might provide.
Precisely. By bringing up the word benefit as an explicit opposite to the action being discussed, that verse clarifies that haram is that which is harmful, in opposition to that which brings benefit.
So sin is just harm.
In practical terms, yes. Sin is defined as that which hurts others or oneself. This elevates the whole concept of prohibition from a mere list of forbidden activities to a protective principle against self-destruction and social corrosion.
This framework gives us a massive foundation for understanding how halal extends into modern life. Let's move to the practical applications where this cost-benefit analysis is most clearly applied.
We see this first and most complexly in finance. This is why we speak of interest-free banking. The policy of riba, which is generally understood as usury or charging interest on loans,
Right.
is specifically categorized as a haram policy.
So why is riba seen as causing greater harm than benefit? I mean, in modern banking, interest is viewed as essential for economic stability.
Well, within the Islamic economic framework, riba is seen as creating systemic harm because it guarantees a return without accepting risk.
Okay, no risk.
No risk. This transfers wealth from the poor to the rich and creates debt dependency. This violates the protection of wealth and promotes injustice.
So what's the alternative?
Instead, halal finance demands transactions be based on shared risk, things like mudaraba or musharaka. This ensures that returns are tied to actual productivity and the honest sharing of profits and losses. The goal is equitable circulation of wealth, and riba fundamentally violates that objective.
That's a deep application of the anti-harm principle applied to the entire global economy. Okay, let's pivot to clothing. This is often misunderstood as pure cultural practice, but it's an application of halal behavior.
It is, absolutely. It's an application of modesty and dignity. We see this through guidelines like the use of hijab and abaya for women and rules covering for men as well. But it isn't just about covering the body. It's about maintaining public modesty and ensuring that one's appearance adheres to the halal framework of dignity and respect. The idea is that this protects social order and reduces potential sources of temptation or moral harm.
And the rule regarding intoxicants becomes an obvious extension of that harm principle from verse 2.219.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Shunning all intoxicants, including alcohol, is a clear-cut case. Alcohol and drugs severely compromise the intellect, which is one of the 5 protected necessities of the law.
Right.
Since the harm damage to health, intellect, family, public order vastly outweighs any momentary perceived benefit, the prohibition remains absolute.
And the principles even extend into less tangible areas like media and recreation. Many people might think, what I watch on my screen is purely personal, but the halal framework dictates otherwise.
It does. The guidelines require that the content you consume or the activities you engage in do not lead directly to haram actions or promote moral decay or cause spiritual harm.
So an example might be,
for example, if a form of media encourages hate or violence or explicitly depicts prohibited actions, its consumption may be deemed haram, because it violates the protection of religion and social harmony. The ethical screen is always applied to one's environment and input.
Okay. And finally, let's revisit professional practices. This is where the halal principle meets global logistics.
And this is hugely relevant today. We're talking about industrial and manufacturing logistics, supply chains, business conduct itself.
The whole 9 yards.
The whole thing. The halal principle demands that all commercial endeavors be performed with honesty, transparency, and justice, including how profits and losses are shared, how employees are treated, and the ethical source of all materials.
So the whole chain has to be clean.
The whole chain. If a supply chain involves exploitation, fraud, or supports a haram activity elsewhere, like producing pork or alcohol, the entire chain is compromised. And this reinforces that earlier principle of shared accountability we'll get into.
Right. Okay, so moving from the broad ethical blueprint to the specifics, let's focus on the area most commonly associated with halal, the explicit dietary laws. While the framework is massive, food remains a crucial application. We have 4 clear categories of forbidden food and drink established right in the Quran.
Yes, for this we turn to the bedrock verse, Quran 2.173, which systematically lists the core dietary restrictions. These are the absolutes.
The first prohibition is carrion. This means any animal that dies naturally or accidentally without proper ritual intervention. Why is the manner of death so important that it renders the animal prohibited?
Well, the prohibition of carrion relates to hygiene, purity, and the proper sanctity of life. An animal dying naturally may have died of disease, making it medically unsafe.
Right, a health issue.
A health issue. But more fundamentally, the consumption of carrion violates the ritual requirements that demonstrate human dominion over nature while respecting the life that is taken. The process of ritual slaughter is key to acknowledging that life is taken in God's name, not by accident.
Got it. The second prohibition is blood. The consumption of blood itself is forbidden.
Yeah, this prohibition is almost universal in Abrahamic traditions and has deep historical roots concerning purity and health. Blood is seen as the essence of life and traditionally a potential carrier of disease.
So in the context of halal slaughter.
Ensuring the draining of the blood is a necessary step for purifying the meat.
Okay. Third, and this is the one known globally, swine or pork.
The prohibition against pork is absolute. The sources don't require a detailed utilitarian explanation for every prohibition. The divine command is sufficient.
But there are traditional reasons given.
Oh yes. Historically, many scholars and traditions point to issues of cleanliness and disease, but the primary reason remains the clear command in the text. Swine are classified as inherently impure.
And the final prohibition connects back to the very act of consumption. What is slaughtered in the name of any other than Allah? This speaks to the necessary intention behind the taking of life.
This is perhaps the most profound of the four. It requires the invocation of God's name at the moment of slaughter. The meat itself might be from a permissible animal, but if the intention is dedicated to an idol or a deity other than God, or just done without acknowledging the sanctity of the act,
It's forbidden.
it's forbidden. This prohibition ensures that all permissible consumption is an act of worship and an acknowledgement of God's provision.
So that fourth point leads us directly to the requirement of the slaughter itself, which is often called dabiha. It's not enough for the animal to be intrinsically permissible. The method of preparation has to follow specific guidelines.
That's right. Quran 5.5 and 6.118 stress this requirement. Muslims must eat only of what is slaughtered in Allah's name, if you truly believe in His revelations.
And what does that entail?
The method of slaughter must be swift and humane, and the invocation of God's name is essential. This religious dedication during the act of slaughter is what ritually sanctifies the food, making it permissible for consumption. The procedure is not negotiable.
Now we touch on an incredibly important provision for interfaith relations, the people of the book exception. This expands permissibility quite a bit.
It does. Quran 5.5 addresses this directly. Today, all good, pure foods have been made lawful for you. Similarly, the food of the people of the book is permissible for you, and yours is permissible for them.
And the people of the book refers to?
It refers specifically to Christians and Jews, or al-Kitab.
What's the underlying rationale for allowing the food of these specific religious groups?
The rationale is twofold. First, they adhere an Abrahamic lineage and generally adhere to monotheistic ethical traditions.
Right.
Second, and crucially, Jews and Christians also adhere to ritualistic rules regarding slaughter and preparation. While they might differ in specifics from dabiha, they demonstrate a fundamental recognition of sanctity, cleanliness, and the prohibition of those four core forbidden items.
So because they also have rules about ritual purity, avoiding blood and carrion and so on.
Their food is generally deemed permissible for Muslims. Yes.
That's a powerful acknowledgement of common religious principles, facilitating interaction and shared community life. But let's turn to the safety valve, the part of the law that acknowledges human frailty and extreme circumstances, the necessity clause.
This is the critical, narrow exception to all prohibitions. The necessity clause is analyzed in Quran 2.173 and reiterated in 6.118. It states that one is not sinful if someone is compelled by necessity, neither driven by desire nor exceeding immediate need.
This isn't a simple loophole, is it? How does jurisprudence strictly define compelled by necessity?
The definition is very harsh and narrow. It means a genuine life-threatening situation where consuming the forbidden item is the only possible means of survival.
So we're talking about starvation.
Severe starvation, imminent threat of death or extreme duress. It cannot be for mere comfort or convenience or simple appetite. If there is any halal alternative available, the exception is void.
And the verse specifies two critical conditions to prevent misuse, neither driven by desire nor exceeding immediate need.
These conditions are the lock on the gate. The restriction, neither driven by desire, ensures the intent is purely survival, not self-gratification. You can't simply crave the forbidden item.
Right. And the second part.
And the restriction, nor exceeding immediate need, means you must consume only the absolute minimum required to avert the danger. Once the necessity is removed, once you reach safety or find permissible food, the temporary license to consume the haram immediately expires.
This careful constraint ensures that the underlying prohibition remains respected, even when it's temporarily suspended. It shows the law is fundamentally designed to preserve life, which is the highest objective, the maqasid, but that this provision is meticulously guarded.
And this section of the text is followed by a very strong context and warning from God, explaining that He has already explained to you what He has forbidden to you, except when compelled by necessity. This suggests the clarity of the law is already inherent.
And the warning that follows is incredibly relevant for navigating modern ethical landscapes, where people constantly introduce new opinions and interpretations.
It is. The text warns that many deviant zealots certainly mislead others by their whims out of ignorance. Surely your Lord knows the transgressors best.
Which is a powerful call for intellectual rigor.
Absolutely. The verses emphasize that the fundamental rules are clear in the primary sources, the Quran and Sunnah. Therefore, critical thinking and a deep understanding of the source material are necessary to avoid being misled by ignorant whims or unfounded personal opinions or misinterpretations dressed up as innovation.
It's a mandate to question those who claim authority without evidence from the foundational texts. Okay, so if the halal haram system were simply a list of things to do or not do, it would get outdated pretty quickly. What gives the system its comprehensive, eternal quality is its legal methodology, the way it extends prohibition beyond the immediate act.
This is where we move into the preventative legal mechanisms used in jurisprudence. It's not enough to just say, the prohibited action is X. Islamic jurisprudence asks, well, what creates the environment for X to happen?
This introduces the key Islamic principle, often known as Sadd al-Dharai, or blocking the means. We're calling it the path to haram principle.
Yes. If something is prohibited or forbidden, then anything that leads directly and likely to it is also considered a haram, or, at the very minimum, a discouraged act. This principle is vital for maintaining an ethical protective perimeter around the absolute prohibitions.
Can you give us a clear, non-dietary example of how this operates in practice?
Sure. Take the prohibition of murder. If the path leading to murder is defined as, say, incitement to violence, or carrying weapons with the explicit intent to harm, or even certain acts of severe injustice and oppression that inevitably lead to violent retaliation, these intermediate steps may be deemed haram because they are clear paths to the ultimate prohibition. The law seeks to prevent the forbidden act before it's even committed by eliminating the infrastructure that enables it.
So if the destination is forbidden, the roads leading there must also be closed off. This preventive measure has to be particularly relevant in the world of business and finance, where supply chains are so complex.
Oh, absolutely. If consuming intoxicants is haram, then activities that encourage or facilitate that consumption, like manufacturing them, investing in a brewery, renting a commercial space specifically for a gambling den.
Even writing the contract.
Even writing the contract for such a business. All of that would fall under this extended prohibition. The principle prevents the legitimization of the entire infrastructure of sin.
And this preventive principle flows naturally into the even broader concept of shared accountability, the principle of moral and material support. This moves accountability beyond just the individual perpetrator.
This principle is a cornerstone of Islamic communal ethics. It states that the sin of haram is not limited only to the person who engages in the prohibited activity.
So who else bears the burden?
The sin extends profoundly to others who support the person in that activity, whether that support is material like financial backing, providing supplies, logistics, or even moral.
Moral support.
Encouragement, defense, normalization. This creates a system where accountability is communal, reinforcing the need for mutual oversight and ethical partnership.
This principle must create incredible challenges for a Muslim professional working in the modern secular economy. If a Muslim investor holds shares in a conglomerate that derives, say, a small portion of its revenue from interest-based lending or alcohol sales, how does this principle affect their position?
And that is the subject of constant fiqh deliberation. If we connect this to the bigger picture of professional practices, this principle is hugely significant.
I can imagine.
Scholars usually classify involvement on a spectrum. Direct, active participation like serving the alcohol or processing the loan interest is clearly haram.
Okay.
Passive, indirect support, like a maintenance worker fixing a pipe in a bank that deals in riba, is less severe. But the individual is still morally obligated to seek a fully permissible livelihood.
So the principle means accountability extends deep into the community and supply chains. If you knowingly facilitate a haram transaction, you share in the sin. This reinforces that need for honesty and transparency in all business dealings.
It acts as an internal moral filter on all economic activity. It means you have to vet your business partners, your financial interests, and even your moral associations, ensuring you are not materially or verbally supporting a haram endeavor.
Which is why specialized halal investment funds exist.
Exactly. They exist to actively screen out companies involved in forbidden industries.
It transforms the distinction between halal and haram into an issue of corporate and communal responsibility. It creates a protective web where the community is tasked with acting as a single body, filtering out prohibited elements.
Which is why financial regulations, like those against riba, are so stringent. They're designed to protect the entire financial ecosystem from harm, and everyone is tasked with upholding them.
Right. Okay, so having established that legal methodology that extends prohibition, let's now map out the specific landscape of haram as detailed in the sources, breaking them down into categories.
Good idea.
We'll start with forbidden actions, which are the behaviors that cause direct, discernible harm to the individual or society.
Okay, so our sources detail specific categories of prohibited behaviors. These are all linked by their intrinsic damage to those protected essentials of life, intellect, family, or wealth.
And the list includes?
The list includes cursing, which involves verbal harm and the destruction of dignity; fornication, which harms the moral fabric and the family unit; murder, which is the ultimate physical harm; and crucially, disrespecting one's parents.
That last one stands out. Why is disrespecting parents listed alongside actions as severe as murder? What's the theological link there?
The link is the preservation of the social structure and community cohesion. Disrespecting one's parents, or uquoqual walidain, is considered an enormous sin because the family unit is a fundamental pillar of society.
So it's about social order.
It's about social order. Violating this relationship breaks down that order, and the spiritual gravity of breaking that covenant with the first people God commanded you to honor is seen as profoundly damaging. It could potentially lead to social dissolution. It violates the protection of progeny and family.
It's a hierarchy of harm where relational damage is treated with the utmost seriousness. Okay. Next, let's look at the systemic level. Forbidden policies, economic.
Here, the focus is squarely on the policy of riba usury or interest. We discussed earlier that this targets the structure of transactions. It is a forbidden policy because it's viewed as an engine of systemic injustice and debt-based exploitation, violating the protection of wealth for the whole community.
The focus is on the mechanism itself.
Yes, the mechanism of wealth extraction itself, not just the intention of the lender.
And then we reiterate the explicit rules concerning forbidden foods and drinks.
This circles back to the dietary absolutes, classifying pork and intoxicants, like alcohol, as haram. It's a clear category based on cleanliness and the preservation of the intellect. And the rationale, as we derive from Quran 2.219, is consistently applied here. The great harm of these items outweighs any potential fleeting benefit.
The fourth category is a prohibition of omission rather than commission, haram by inaction.
This is particularly illuminating. It details the concept that the failure to perform a required duty can also constitute sin. The specific example provided is abandoning the salah, the ritual prayer, without a valid reason.
Why is this inaction elevated to the status of haram?
The salah is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's an essential covenantal act of daily worship that reinforces the believer's commitment and connection to God.
So abandoning it is like?
Abandoning it willfully constitutes a neglect of one's foundational relationship with the divine and is considered harmful to one's spiritual state. This reinforces the idea that the framework covers both sins of commission and sins of omission. Life is an active state of compliance, not merely passive avoidance of evil.
Finally, we arrive at the most dynamic category. Conditional haram, or the concept of halal turned haram. This shows how flexible and time-bound the system is.
Yes, this analyzes the dynamic aspect, where normally halal permissible objects, foods, or actions become haram under specific temporary conditions. This is where intention, time, and adherence to procedure intersect critically with the law.
Okay, let's look at the first source example. Halal food and drinks consumed during the day in Ramadan.
Right. Food and drink are intrinsically halal. However, during the prescribed hours of fasting in the month of Ramadan, when temporary abstinence is required, consuming them is haram.
So the context changes everything.
The temporary religious command and time-specific restriction override the intrinsic permissibility of the object. The action itself becomes prohibited due to the context of worship.
And the second example relates back to the dietary laws and procedure. A halal animal that is not slaughtered in the name of Allah.
This is a perfect demonstration of conditional permissibility. The animal itself, let's say a goat, is halal meat. But if the procedure of slaughtering it in the name of Allah, the dabiha, is violated,
The meat becomes haram.
the resulting meat instantly becomes haram. The failure to adhere to the required ritual condition transforms the final product from permissible to forbidden. This just emphasizes that permissibility is often dependent on fulfilling all the necessary procedural and intentional conditions.
That structural conditionality shows that Islamic jurisprudence isn't a rigid list. It's a dynamic, sophisticated ethical system based on weighing intent, time, conditionality, and that core principle of harm versus benefit. It requires continuous application and critical thought.
It really does. We've covered a profound range of material today. We started with the foundational linguistic opposition of halal permissible, unbinding, and haram, which is forbidden, restricting, and tied to harm. We then navigated how this framework expands far, far beyond diet into finance, business ethics, and social conduct.
We've seen that the Halal Haram framework is a total ethical code derived directly from the Quran and the Sunnah and then rigorously interpreted by fiqh. It defines sin, fundamentally, as that which brings material, financial, physical, or spiritual harm to oneself or others.
And the legal framework acts as a comprehensive ethical shield, providing clarity and establishing necessary boundaries. The rules for the core areas are established, but the broader principles, like the principle of harm outweighing benefit from Quran 2.219, and the principle that paths leading to haram are themselves forbidden, those provide the tools necessary for addressing the relentless complexities of the modern world.
So what does this all mean? The system is designed not to restrict life, but to protect it in its most essential forms: intellect, wealth, family, and faith.
Exactly. And as you continue to reflect on this comprehensive ethical system, we'll leave you with one final thought, one that invites you to consider the applicability of the core principle itself.
Okay.
Since the source clarifies that haram is defined by the hurt it causes others or oneself, consider this. How does a measurement of benefit versus harm, which was established in the context of wine and gambling, become the ultimate critical tool for life decisions when immediate explicit prohibition is not available? It suggests that the responsibility to analyze and weigh consequences is in itself a necessary ethical mandate.